Today, today, my guest is Professor David Teece, and I will keep my introduction short to maximize our time with him. In the next 30 minutes or so, we'll talk about David as a person, Professor Teece as a thought leader and esteemed scholar, and finally as a mentor to many PhD students and junior faculty. Well, David has done it all, and for the sake of time, I will skip many of his accomplishments and give you a very quick snapshot. He was the lead author on the most cited article in Economics and Business from 1995 to 2005. Yesterday, when I looked up his citation index, it was 169,779. His age index is 111. I've never seen these numbers before, but I-10 index is 257. He is one of the top 10 most cited scholars in economics and business. He is one of the world's top 50 business intellectuals and also the chairman and principal executive officer of the Berkeley Research Group. Thank you, David, for joining.
My pleasure.
First question, what did you want to become when you were a child?
First of all, I wasn't sure, but two things I thought about was being an electrician or being an optometrist. I was interested in physics and mechanical and electrical things back in the early days.
When was the first time that you started thinking about the difference between domestic versus foreign?
Well, my dad had been with the New Zealand Army during the Second World War, and he was in, I guess, modern day Libya and Egypt and Italy. And I suppose when I was 4 years old, I got regaled of stories of the Leaning Tower of Pisa and many of the wonderful things in North Africa and in Southern Europe. So that was probably the first time.
Of all the things you could have done, why did you choose IB?
I'm not sure I chose IB. In some sense, the field may have chosen me a little bit. As a graduate student, I did study international economics. It was one of my majors. And I was very interested in the international firm, the multinational enterprise. So I think it's my interest in the multinational enterprise that sort of caused me to be a de facto member of the field. But I didn't think of myself as an international business scholar early on. I thought of myself as an applied industrial organization economist with a focus on innovation.
What's something not many people know about you, which is not on your CV, your hobbies, your things that you like to do?
Well, you know, I like to sail. I like the great outdoors. I like challenges. I like the mountains and the oceans. That's probably not on my CV. I also like to build things, whether they're organizations or physical things, but particularly organizations.
Well, if you stopped doing what you're doing today, what would be your second best alternative career path?
Well, in a way, I have probably 3 or 4 career paths right now. I mean, international business is one, academia is one, but I also built companies, and I'm the chairman and executive officer or principal executive officer of the Berkeley Research Group. These are sort of, and an active consultant. So they're all sort of separate careers. The one that I've dabbled with that perhaps I would like to spend more time on is being a venture capitalist. I've done a small amount of venture investing, and I think I'd like to do more of it.
Well, let's talk about regrets. What is the one thing you wish you would have done, but you didn't in the past?
You know, I don't carry around a lot of regrets. I suppose when I look back on it, you know, I took a publicly traded company, Canterbury Clothing Company, private, to scale it to a global organization. It was basically a regional organization, and we successfully scaled it, but I didn't pay enough attention to having the right management systems in place. We didn't have the right balance sheet. So I suppose I'd like to do that all over again and do it better if I could.
What happened to the company?
What happened to the company? Well, the brand is still out there. We succeeded in taking a regional brand global, but during the global financial crisis, it fell upon hard times, and it ended up going into bankruptcy. But it came out of bankruptcy and is still an active global rugby brand in Europe and in Australia and New Zealand. So it's not what it could have been, but it is, it did go from a regional brand to a global brand, but not quite in the style and manner and with the fulsomeness that I'd hoped.
Other than research, other than consulting or building companies, what are you most passionate about?
What are
you most passionate about?
Oh, my passions. That's a very good question. I really believe that, the world has had 250 years of economic and political freedom, starting way back in the 17th and 18th century. And the freedom is not widely enjoyed by everybody on the planet Earth. And I worry that it's going to be eroded. And so my passion is to make sure the liberal democracies stay strong and vibrant, that they can lead in the technologies of the future, because whoever leads in the technology of the future is going to be able to control the destiny of the planet, in my view. So I'm passionate about making sure the liberal democracies come together and in some collective way achieve that goal.
So which countries are leading this technology race then at the moment? Who are the top three?
Sorry, the audio wasn't so good.
Who are the top three countries that are leading the technology race at the moment?
Well, China, the United States, and, probably the EU, although it's not a single country, but, between the EU and Japan, that's sort of the other key part of the puzzle, I would say. So, it roughly breaks down in that manner.
Okay, let's talk about research then. So you're stranded in a small village, you sought refuge in a small neighborhood pub, locals are curious about you and what you do for a living, and they don't know you, they haven't read your work. What do you say? How do you summarize your research to this audience? And if they follow up, if they ask you a question about why is this thing important, what would you say?
Well, I would say, isn't it a wonderful thing that we have global businesses, because they are really the engine of economic development and technology transfer worldwide. I mean, the fact that, 1 billion people have been taken out of poverty in Asia over the last, 30 to 40 years is due substantially to the role that corporations have played in transferring technologies from places where it was developed to places where it could be applied. So it's that technology transfer process that's in some ways invisible until you see the results. And what I would talk about is how wonderful that is. And it's because of an open global system that it's happened. And we should give recognition to the role of private enterprise in economic development. That's, I think, the big thing that people on the street don't understand as well as they should, and academics don't understand as well as they should.
What would you say about income inequality or wealth inequality across these billions of people?
What do I say about it? Well, I say, first of all, there has been a considerable leveling. I mean, we forget the fact that the number of people that are close to poverty as a proportion of the world's population has dropped dramatically in the last 20 to 30 years. So there's been more progress in eliminating poverty in the last 30 years than ever before. At the same time, there's been increases in income inequality, but one should also pay attention to the fact that those people that were really struggling to get their daily food, we're in a lot better position. So yes, there has been some growing income inequality, but at the same time, the bottom has been lifted, particularly in Asia, enormously.
Well, what are the few omitted variables in IB research?
Okay. What is the
What are the omitted variables?
The omitted variables. Well, let me just focus on one. I wouldn't want to try and create a whole list, but the most salient one to me is capabilities. Now, it's not entirely omitted because, there's a small group of us that have focused on it, but I find it absolutely amazing that the theory of economic development and the theories of international business have gone as far as they have without really a deep and studied development of the role of organizational capabilities. There's been some work on individual capabilities. Amartya Sen and others have focused on that. But in terms of understanding organizational capabilities and how they get augmented and what role they play in shaping, technology, trade, and investment flows, it's deeply under-researched. John Sutton at the London Business School, who's a very mainstream economist, has said that, the wealth of nations really depends on the capabilities of firms. It's something that I believe for a long time and what I've been saying for a long time, but the mainstream economics, and I consider myself first and foremost an applied economist, have been incredibly slow to focus on this. And for that matter, I think international business has been slow to focus on it too. We've done a lot of work on the role of transactions costs and things like that, which I think has been beneficial. But the understanding of capabilities should be central to the study of international business and economic development. And it's not. And it's not because I think people don't think it's important. It's because the intellectual framework's out there and it's hard. All the more reason why we should be working on it. So I'll say there's a cluster of omitted variables around the role of capabilities, whether they're ordinary capabilities or dynamic capabilities, but that's a very under-researched area.
Now, where do you see the next 5 to 10 years of IB research in? What is the next big thing in IB?
Well, the next big thing is that the global order as we knew it, the post-World War II global order that was shaped by Britain and the United States, and the institutions that support it, whether it's, the World Bank or the WTO or whatever, essentially is being challenged by China. China is sort of analog for that system is the Belt and Road and everything that goes with it. But it's not the rule of law. It's more one of my colleagues at Berkeley, Paul Tiffany, is called the rule of rulers. So we have to get used to a global order where maybe it's two or more clusters, a cluster of autocracies and a cluster of liberal democracies, and maybe a cluster of firms that have some mixture of the two. But I think that the norms of international commerce and the way in which transactions take place is going to be different in those different spheres. So We've sort of been merrily writing, doing scholarship in international business as if there was a unified system of rules. We've always recognized around the edges that there are differences, but that assumption is no longer valid. So, as the world gets more fragmented, maybe IB scholarship is going to get more fragmented too. Maybe it has to get more fragmented in order to understand what's going on. But if it gets more fragmented, then there's still going to be the job of integrating it in some way. So I think that's the primary challenge for IB scholarship. And Olga Petrusevich and myself wrote a piece a couple of years ago in Jibs that was sort of opening that door to saying this is what's different.
Interesting. About the cluster of autocracies and cluster of democracies, is it possible to play two different games in the same playing field? Can you play soccer and football in the same yard?
Well, the answer is you can. The question is, what's the game going to look like? And I think it's a very good question. And so I think what's going to happen is that because it's hard, people are going to play in different fields. People are going to choose. And I refer to this as sort of clubs of sovereignty, if you will. So I can see, a club of autocracies. I can see various regional clubs of liberal democracies. Asia Pacific could be one, for example. So I think because it's difficult, you're going to see fragmentation and concentration in different fields, if you will, different subfields, defined both by mission and by region. So regional definitions are easy to come by, but also missions, like with respect to artificial intelligence, who's going to be cooperating in that area and engaging with each other. I think it's a different group of countries different groups of companies and countries will start to assemble, and I think that a corollary of this is the national identity of multinational firms is going to become more important. I mean, we've been writing an international business scholarship about how the international firm is sort of without nationality, and that's been the trend for 50 to 60 to 70 years, that nationality has mattered less. But with the rise of China, I think that's going to flip the other way, and nationality is going to matter more. Is Pepsi Cola an American firm today? I don't think so. But in the future, maybe it'll have to decide where to plant its flag. Boeing is a national company. The companies that are defense contractors are clearly identified with individual sovereign states. And I think in the future, companies will all look like defense contractors in the sense that their nationality will be more transparent, because it's going to be hard to play in all these different fields, which I think is the import of your question. How do you play on these different fields? And the answer is not very well unless you know who the players are and what they stand for and which club they belong to.
Interesting. I mean, some countries are going to be changing sides as well. Germany and France, while they constitute European Union, they are the European Union to a good degree. Well, they are also infighting with each other, right? They have to choose side eventually.
Yes, there's frictions there, but I think when it comes to France and Germany and China, I think they're beginning to see China the same way. So the differences between them are less than the differences between France and Germany and China. So I think you're right that there will always be those differences, but there's a widening gap, I think, between China and Europe now than there was 5 years ago.
Well, you did mention about the field becoming more fragmented, and it should be fragmented, and then we need to integrate it somehow. From your window, how did the culture of IB scholars evolve over time, and is this a fruitful evolution? What did we lose? What did we gain along the path from the old times of, say, Dunning, and then now?
Well, that's an extremely good question. I think that Ivy scholarship probably can benefit from focusing on particular missions. For instance, international firms that have the mission in AI or in biotech or something or other, and looking at both mission and looking at region, or when I say region, whatever club they're going to become part of. I think if we can sort of start to reweave the tapestry around mission and around clubs, and then once we make some progress on that, think about how all of this hangs together, if it hangs together at all. So as the global economy fragments, I think international business scholarship is going to have to fragment too, but in a different way from the way it's fragmented in the past. But then real good scholarship then has to once again integrate. But I think step one is to fragment by mission and by regional club or political club, if you will, and then trying to weave it all back together again.
Final question in the research segment. Which IB questions are overly studied? Which areas are less fruitful, in your opinion?
I have to be honest and say that I'm not well read in all aspects of international business because I'm working in multiple disciplines. I'm working in IB, I'm writing in law and economics, I'm writing in intellectual property, I'm writing in competition policy, I'm writing in strategic management. I don't have the luxury of looking into every corner of the field of international business. So what I tend to do is sort of look at the things that interest me the most, which is issues primarily around the international firm. So the ones that I find most fruitful are the work that sort of looks at global research and development systems and what's happening with respect to outsourcing and vertical integration, the aspects of international business that intersect with fundamental questions. And a fundamental question to me is, what is it that drives the scope of the enterprise? What is it that drives the scope of vertical integration? What is it that limits outsourcing? Can, the Apple model of relying as much as it does on manufacturing in China, is that viable long-term? How does a company like Apple manage its supply chain when that supply chain crosses multiple jurisdictions that are no longer as harmonious as they used to be? So I think that's where IB needs to go, which means that there's a great need to link international business and international economics and international management. All of those things have to be linked together because the questions are becoming increasingly complex.
I mean, you've given enough thought, a lot of thought actually, on the role of the Chinese government or the Chinese enterprise system. How does it work with the rest of the world? How does it work with the rest of the economic systems? Their model is quite different.
Yeah. Well, it's very, very different. I mean, first of all, a lot of large Chinese companies are state-owned, but even those that are not state-owned, the relationship between business and government is very close. Corporations in Japan have to do what the central government wants them to do, whereas in the Western democracies, the focus is towards key stakeholders, which is usually shareholders first and workers and communities and so forth. But one of the stakeholders is not the government. The government is not a stakeholder other than as a regulator. The government is a regulator, but not a stakeholder. But in the Chinese model, government is a stakeholder, and companies have to directly or indirectly do what the state wants them to do. So the behavior of a Chinese enterprise is therefore going to be different from a enterprise that has its origins elsewhere in the world.
So do you expect Western governments to increase their regulator role coming up in the next 5 years?
It's a good question. This is a big conundrum that Western governments have to face. And a few minutes ago, I talked about sovereignty becoming more important. Ironically, one of the great books in international business was Ray Burnham's book, Sovereignty at Bay, which was really a question mark that he published back in the 70s. First of all, sovereignty has never really been at bay. It's always been alive, but it's becoming more and more important. So, we're walking backwards from the sort of open model where the multinational corporation could operate without giving too much attention to any one government. They had to comply with the laws and regulations of individual jurisdictions in which they're operating, but they were without nationality, so to speak, or they had every nationality, and they would pride themselves in that. I believe that's going to change dramatically. It's in the process of changing dramatically right now.
And the final segment, the advice and the mentoring segment. What type of skills should the PhD students and junior faculty be aiming to hone in on? And what are the skills or the type of skills that are difficult to develop?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I've always believed that being multidisciplinary is important. I mean, we have disciplines for convenience. We don't have disciplines because that's the right way to understand anything. But, to solve complex problems, you sometimes have to start at a fairly granular level. And we have disciplines in part for social reasons, so that people with common interests can work together. And we can also measure who is a good scientist and who is not. So we create disciplines for reasons of convenience, not because doing disciplinary work, single disciplinary work is the right way to solve complex problems. Every complex problem involves multiple disciplines. So I think where we need to go is to bear that in mind, that yes, we need to have a disciplinary foundations, but we also need to be interdisciplinary at the same time. And in a way, the field of international business is fairly interdisciplinary. It draws on political science, it draws on economics, it draws on management, it draws on psychology, it draws on organization theory. So in a way, international business is fairly multidisciplinary, but I think we have to put even more attention on understanding technologies. The technologies of the industrial age are different from the technologies of the digital age. And a lot of the basic issues like economies of scale and scope need to be thought about differently. I mean, understanding big data. I don't think there's too many people in the field of international business who understand big data very well. I don't understand big data very well, but I know that if I want to understand the big tech world, which is a big role in international business, I got to understand, how big data is accumulated, how it's managed, how it's recombined, how it's orchestrated. And I haven't seen much in the field of international business. There may be literature on that, but I haven't seen it. The role of platforms is more important. I think there is some work on platforms, but there's a whole set of new issues as we move from the industrial age to the digital age that we have to all get a lot sharper on.
For the sake of time, we've got only room for one question. What is the one question I should have asked you but didn't?
Oh, goodness. I think probably the role of patience in research. I've always run after fundamental issues when I do my research. And sometimes you really don't get much of an audience for that. My doctoral thesis, for instance, was in economics on international technology transfer. There was an audience of size 2 for that work at the time I published it. And now it is sort of a seminal issue. And I think the academic world sort of forces people to get quick hits with little publications that build CVs. And I suppose that's okay, but one should always have in mind bigger questions, bigger, more fundamental questions. And it takes a lot of patience, because if you're working on big new things, it's going to take a long time before you get recognition for it. It takes a long time to knock down new ideas and to knock down old ideas and put new ones in place, to knock down old paradigms and create new paradigms. It's an uphill battle, because you've got to unseat everybody that has got a big investment in the old paradigm. So the trait that you need for that is patience, and patience coupled with good judgment, because part of the problem is you don't know whether your new idea is in fact a good idea. So there's a lot of new ideas that are bad ideas and new ideas that are good ideas. And the selection process, can be very long. And so having tenacity, I think, is an important trait, and having patience is an important trait.
Thank you, David, for your time, for this very interesting and candid interview. I learned a lot, and I'm sure others are going to agree with me. Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you for a set of well thought through questions. They were very provocative.